3 terrifying true forest horror stories that happened in the dead of night. Story 1, The Whistler by the Riverbend. In 2013, a pair of siblings, Lena and Jacob, were camping in the dense pine forests of northern Washington state, near a riverbend known for its serenity and isolation. They were used to the woods, raised by a father who had served as a park ranger, but nothing could prepare them for what happened that night. Around 2 a.m., Lena was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of whistling, a tune so eerily slow and deliberate that it chilled her to the bone. She thought it might be Jacob playing a prank, but when she looked over, he was still fast asleep. The whistling came again, this time closer, and from somewhere just beyond the thin wall of their tent. Slowly, carefully, she sat up, heart racing. Whoever, or whatever it was, they were circling the tent. The whistle continued, always in the same rhythm, but never from the same direction twice. Suddenly, the whistling stopped. The silence pressed down like a weight. Then Jacob whispered, "You hear that too?" They didn't move or speak again until the first gray light of dawn crept in. When they stepped outside, the forest looked undisturbed, except for one thing: bare footprints in the frost, surrounding the tent in a wide, perfect circle. No signs of shoes, no animal prints, just human feet, barefoot in the cold. Local rangers claimed it might have been a local vagrant, but the siblings swear it was not human. They said whatever it was never broke twigs, never rustled leaves, and the whistling continued long after they'd fled the forest. Story 2, The Silent Campground. In 2007, a group of 5 university students set out for a week-long camping trip in the forests of Appalachia. They pitched tents at a public but rarely used campground, an open clearing with a single fire ring and old wooden benches. They were the only ones there. On their second night, as they sat around the fire, they noticed something strange. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, owls, even the wind, completely stopped. It was as if someone had hit mute on the entire world. Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks against a tree, then silence, then 3 more, closer. One of the students, Will, joked it was just a woodpecker, trying to lighten the mood. But when he turned on his flashlight and swept it toward the tree line, the beam caught something tall and very pale ducking behind a trunk. The group panicked and retreated into their tents, zipping them up and holding their breath. No one slept. The next morning, they discovered that every one of their tents had been unzipped halfway during the night. Nothing was stolen, nothing was moved, but there were drag marks in the dirt, like something had crawled from the woods to each tent. They cut their trip short. Days later, one of them received an anonymous email from a local address. It simply read, "The forest lets you leave. That doesn't mean you're not still being followed." Story 3, The Girl in the Fog. This incident was reported in 1995 by a forest ranger named Alan, who had worked the trails of Oregon's Cascade Range for over 2 decades. One cold October night, he received a distress call on his radio. A little girl was spotted alone on Trail 17, barefoot and crying. He responded immediately, bringing a flashlight and emergency gear. He found her sitting on a moss-covered rock, wearing a torn white nightgown. When he asked where her parents were, she just said, "They told me to run and not look back." He radioed for backup, but when he turned back to speak to the girl again, she was gone. Not a sound. No footsteps, just fog rolling in unnaturally fast. Over the next 7 years, hikers would occasionally report the same thing: a little girl in white, crying quietly near Trail 17. She never aged, never spoke beyond the same words. Some who tried to approach her reported losing time, wandering the woods for hours with no memory. Eventually, the trail was closed and marked unstable terrain. But locals say it's because rangers grew tired of explaining how the girl couldn't be found, even when they followed reports within minutes. Alan quit 2 years before retirement. When asked why, he simply said, "You try helping someone who's already dead and doesn't know it yet." Final note: these stories are from eyewitnesses and local records. Skeptics say they're exaggerations, misunderstandings, but those who've spent real time in the deep woods at night know better. The forest doesn't need to scream to scare you. Sometimes, it just waits. 3 more terrifying true forest horror stories that happened in the dead of night. Part 2, for those who still think the woods sleep at night. Story 4, The Breathing Tree. In 2018, an amateur survivalist named Corey was solo camping deep in the Adirondacks. He had experience, gear, and knowledge, but he didn't have an explanation for what happened on his third night out. Around midnight, he awoke in his hammock to the sound of breathing, heavy, labored, and slow. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a bear, but when he sat up and looked around with his flashlight, he couldn't see anything, and the breathing didn't stop. Then he realized it was coming from above. His light hit the massive oak tree over his hammock, its bark bulging and collapsing like a lung, as if the entire tree was inhaling. Frozen with terror, Corey stayed still until sunrise. When daylight returned, the tree looked normal, but the leaves above his hammock had turned gray, and his gear was covered in a thin film of ash. When he returned home, he posted his experience to a wilderness forum. A local botanist messaged him privately, "Don't go back there. That part of the forest, it eats air." Story 5. The Man with No Face. In the mid-90s, two teenage brothers, Mark and David, were hiking with their uncle in a forest near the Canadian border. It was early October, and nights were cold and clear. On their second night, as they lay in their tent, Mark whispered to David, "There's a man outside the tent." Their uncle was already asleep, snoring lightly. David, unsure if Mark was joking, peeked through the small mesh window. At the edge of the firelight stood a tall, thin man, wearing an old coat and staring straight at them. Only, he had no face. Not burned, not covered, just smooth, pale skin where features should be. David screamed. The uncle woke up, grabbed a flare gun, and fired it into the air. When the light bloomed across the trees, the man was gone, but his footprints remained, pressed deep into the mud, leading from the fire to their tent, and then vanishing mid-stride. Park rangers shrugged it off as a hunter in a mask. The boys never camped again. Years later, Mark had a recurring dream. He's in a dark forest. A voice whispers, "You saw me once. Next time, don't scream." Story 6. The Mimic Beneath the Roots. This story comes from a logger named Ben, who worked remote tree-cutting contracts in Oregon in the early 2000s. He and his team had cleared a section of old-growth forest when they set up camp for the night. Around 3 a.m., Ben was awakened by someone calling his name. It sounded like his friend Terry. "Ben, come here." But something was off. Terry had a deep voice. This one was too light, almost childlike, like someone pretending to be Terry. Ben stepped outside and saw a figure crouched near a massive, uprooted stump, its roots exposed like twisted ribs. "Ben, help me, I'm stuck." Still Terry's voice, but wrong, repeating, like a bad recording. "Help me, help me, help me." Ben grabbed his flashlight, and the beam revealed it wasn't Terry at all. It was something long-limbed and hairless, with black, pupil-less eyes and a smile too wide. It was hiding inside the roots, pressing its face through the gaps. He ran back, screaming. The others woke, but found nothing. The next day, they found a dead deer shoved into the hollow beneath the roots, its body twisted like it had fallen from a great height. Ben quit logging soon after. He said the forest was still speaking in his friend's voice, even when he was miles away. Final warning: campfires may keep away the cold. They don't keep away the things that know your name, your face, your voice. Especially not in the forest, after midnight. Would you like part 3 next? 3 final terrifying true forest horror stories that happened in the dead of night. Part 3, for those who can still sleep with the lights off. Story 7, the trail that wasn't there yesterday. In 2011, Mia and her fiancé Dan were hiking through a familiar section of the Allegheny National Forest. They'd done the loop several times before and knew it well, but as twilight approached, Dan noticed a narrow path branching off the main trail, one neither of them had ever seen before. Curious, they followed it for about half an hour. The path was unnaturally straight and eerily quiet. No animals, no wind, just the crunch of their boots and the growing sense that something was wrong. As night fell, they decided to head back, but when they turned around, the trail was gone, literally gone. Behind them, the underbrush was so thick it was like the path had never existed. They tried retracing their steps but ended up walking in circles. Their GPS didn't work, and their compass spun uselessly. Then, somewhere in the darkness, they heard their own voices, Mia calling for Dan, and Dan calling for Mia, only neither of them were speaking. The mimicry grew louder, closer, until it was whispering right behind them. They ran. Eventually, at dawn, they stumbled onto the main trail, scraped, shaken, and somehow 2 miles north of where they'd entered the woods. Weeks later, Mia returned with a forest guide to find that mysterious path. It wasn't there. The guide simply said, "Some trails aren't on any map, because they don't want to be." Story 8, The Hanging Man That Blinked. In 1994, a seasoned hunter named Paul ventured into Colorado's remote San Juan Mountains for a solo elk trip. On his third night, he found a dense grove where he planned to rest, until his flashlight caught something swaying in a tree. It was a man, hanging by the neck. At first, Paul panicked, thinking it was a suicide, but when he stepped closer, he realized the man's eyes were open and blinking. Then the hanging figure turned its head to look at him. Paul dropped his flashlight and ran blindly through the trees. He didn't stop until he reached his truck nearly 4 hours later. When rangers investigated the area, they found nothing, no rope, no signs of disturbance, not even footprints. But Paul never returned to the mountains. He said the image still visits him in dreams. He wakes to the sound of creaking rope and a voice whispering, "I wasn't dead, you just left me." Story 9, The Lantern in the Fog. A firefighter named Rosa shared this story from her volunteer days in Northern California. During a particularly dry season in 2006, she joined a search for a missing boy believed to be lost in the woods. On the second night, while sweeping the forest with a small team, Rosa saw a lantern swaying gently between the trees, about 200 feet away. She followed it, thinking it might be the boy or someone trying to help. But as she got closer, the lantern moved deeper into the fog, always just out of reach. The forest grew unnaturally silent, and her radio lost signal. Finally, she entered a clearing and found the lantern hanging from midair, suspended on nothing. The flame flickered and then went out. Suddenly, she was surrounded by a dozen more lanterns, blinking into existence one by one. Behind her, the path was gone. Ahead of her, nothing but trees, and shapes that moved wrong just behind the fog. She sprinted back the way she came, somehow bursting out of the woods near the staging area. Her teammates said she'd been gone less than 20 minutes. Rosa refused to speak of what she saw again, but months later, she left this note pinned to the wall of the station. "If you see a light in the woods, don't follow it. It's not lost, it's looking." Closing thought. The forest does not care that you're brave. It doesn't care that you're prepared, or smart, or that you don't believe in ghosts. It only waits until you're far enough from safety. And then it decides what you'll never come back from. Want a new theme next? Abandoned towns? Mountains? Swamps? Or more midnight forest tales? 3 more terrifying true forest horror stories that happened in the dead of night. Part 4, for the ones who still think the darkness ends at the treeline. Story 10, The Sleeping Camp That Wasn't. In 2009, a wildlife photographer named Elise was hiking through a dense national forest in British Columbia. By late evening, low clouds rolled in and visibility dropped fast. Instead of pushing forward, she decided to make camp off-trail near a shallow ridge. Just after midnight, Elise woke up to the sound of talking and laughter nearby, multiple voices. Casual and calm, she peeked outside and, through the mist, saw a group of tents and people sitting by a small fire, not far downhill. Relieved she wasn't alone, Elise packed her camera and decided to walk down and say hello. But as she approached the camp, something struck her as wrong. The people weren't moving. The flames weren't flickering. The air was cold, but no breath came from their mouths. Then she noticed all the tents were the same model, lined up too perfectly. She snapped one photo, and every person by the fire turned their head toward her at once, eyes wide. No one blinked, no one stood, they just watched. Elise turned and ran, not stopping until morning. When she reviewed her camera later, every photo was normal, except the last one. The image showed no campfire, no tents, no people, just mist, and something in the trees behind her, peering out with 2 faint white eyes. Story 11, The One Who Crawled on the Ceiling. Loggers working deep in Alaska reported strange sightings in the forest for years, shadowy movements, long gaps in radio signals, strange dreams. But in 1998, a new worker named Joel told the story that shut down their camp for good. He had been sleeping in one of the prefab bunk cabins late one stormy night. The power was out. The room was silent, until he heard the sound of nails scraping across the ceiling. At first, he thought it was tree branches, but then he realized it wasn't above the roof, it was inside. The sound moved slowly across the ceiling tiles, then down the wall, and finally under his bunk. He turned on his flashlight and saw nothing. But when he lay back down, he looked up. There was a face pressed against the ceiling, upside down, smiling back at him. It blinked. He screamed, and the others came running. No one else saw it, but the ceiling above his bunk had finger-shaped dents, like something had been holding on from the inside. The camp was evacuated a week later, officially due to structural collapse concerns. Locals still say that part of the forest is wrong underneath, hollow, and hungry. Story 12. The Man in the Hollow Suit. In 2014, a group of hikers in the Ozarks encountered something none of them have ever been able to forget or explain. One night, while resting near a shallow ravine, they noticed a man standing motionless among the trees about 30 feet away. He wore a dark brown suit, too formal for the woods, and his head hung low like he was asleep on his feet. They called out. He didn't respond. Then he moved, but not like a person. His arms swung too wide, his legs bent the wrong direction, and when he stepped forward, his skin folded inward, like fabric wrapping nothing. He took another step and collapsed, folding in on himself like an empty bag. Then, in total silence, he reassembled, rising slowly with jerky, unnatural precision. That was enough. The hikers ran, left their gear, didn't stop until sunrise. Later, they returned with local authorities. No one was there, but one ranger privately told them, "There's a story about that suit. The old folks said it's not a man, but something that wears the idea of a man, and sometimes it forgets how the skin is supposed to go." Still think you know what's in the forest? The worst thing out there isn't a beast with teeth or claws. It's the thing that knows exactly how to smile like someone you trust, and waits until the fire dies to come closer. Would you like a part 5 next? Or stories from another haunted place, mountains, caves, abandoned villages, or deep-sea horrors? 3 more terrifying true forest horror stories that happened in the dead of night. Part 5, You've come too far to turn back now. The forest knows your name. Story 13, The Cabin That Wasn't on Any Map. In 2002, a man named Trevor was hiking a remote trail through the Uinta Mountains in Utah, caught in a sudden rainstorm near dusk. He scrambled to find shelter. That's when he spotted it, a small log cabin, tucked into a clearing he swore hadn't been on his topo map. The windows were dark, the door cracked open just slightly. Inside, it was dry and dusty, with old furniture, a cold fireplace, and one wooden chair that faced the wall. Thankful for shelter, he unrolled his sleeping bag and settled in. Around 3 a.m., Trevor awoke to soft creaking, like someone shifting in the chair. Then he heard breathing inside the room. When he flicked on his flashlight, the chair was empty. The door was closed. The dust on the floor was undisturbed. Trevor left immediately, not even bothering to pack his bag. He hiked through the night and told a ranger the story the next morning. The ranger went pale and simply asked, "Did it let you leave?" Trevor never found the cabin again, though he returned twice. But he still hears something breathing in his dreams, always just behind him, always waiting for him to sit down and turn around. Story 14, The Screamer in the Pines. A military training unit in Northern California once reported strange sounds during a night navigation exercise in 1996. The recruits were spaced far apart, navigating with compasses and red lights. One of them, named Corporal Jennings, was posted near a dense stand of pine trees when he heard what he described as a woman scream, high, sharp, and too close. Thinking it was a lost hiker or injured soldier, he called it in, but no one else heard anything. Command told him to stay put and observe. Minutes later, it screamed again, closer, and louder, but the forest remained still. When his sergeant arrived to investigate, They found Jennings curled into a ball, eyes wide, unresponsive. He wouldn't speak for 2 days. When he finally talked, all he said was, "It screamed my name, but it didn't have a mouth." Jennings was discharged on medical grounds. That section of forest was later removed from training zones. Unofficially, soldiers began calling it the Echo Line. Because whatever screamed there, they said, could make its voice come from inside your skull. Story 15, The Stranger on the Trail Camera. In 2015, a retired couple living near the edge of a protected forest in Maine set up motion-triggered trail cameras to observe local wildlife. They regularly caught deer, raccoons, and the occasional bear, but one morning, they found something that made them call the police. The camera had taken a photo at 3:17 a.m. In the black and white frame, there stood a man in tattered clothes, facing directly into the lens, but with no eyes, just deep, smooth hollows. His skin was mottled, like wood bark, and his fingers were too long, almost branch-like. The couple had heard nothing that night, no footsteps, no noise, and there were no prints in the dirt where the photo was taken. A week later, another image was captured. This time, the man was closer. Too close. His face filled the frame, his head tilted, still no eyes, still no expression. That was the last image the camera ever took. It stopped working after that, though the batteries were fresh, and there was no damage. The couple moved 2 months later. They left a note for the new owners that simply read, "The woods are quiet here. That's not a comfort. It's a warning." Final thought for tonight. You don't always see what watches you in the forest. But the forest always sees you. Sometimes it's curious. Sometimes it's hungry. And sometimes, it follows you home. Would you like part 6 next? Or should we switch to another setting, abandoned mines, ghost towns, deep caves, or haunted lakes? 3 more terrifying true forest horror stories that happened in the dead of night. Part 6, The deeper you go, the harder it is to leave. Story 16, The Eyes That Opened in the Tree. In 2010, a biologist named Darren was doing nocturnal research in the Black Hills of South Dakota. He had been tracking owl populations and set up sound recorders and motion-activated cameras near an old-growth section deep off-trail. Around 2 a.m., as he sat near one of his recorders, he noticed something strange. The bark of a nearby tree was moving. Not swaying, not cracking, breathing. When he pointed his red flashlight at the trunk, 2 eyes opened in the bark, large, lidless, completely black. Then another pair opened below them, and another. The tree was covered in blinking, watching eyes, dozens of them, peering silently at him. He stood up and backed away. As he moved, the tree made a low groaning sound, and the forest around him went silent. No wind, no bugs, no birds. Darren grabbed his gear and ran back to the station. When he checked the audio recorders the next morning, they had all picked up the same 3 words whispered in different pitches. Stay, stay, stay. Story 17, The Backward Thing. A group of hikers in West Virginia encountered something in 2007 they would never forget, and most refused to speak of again. One night, while gathered around a fire near the edge of Monongahela Forest, they noticed someone walking through the trees, just on the edge of their light. The figure looked human, dressed in dark clothes. But it wasn't right. It was walking backwards, bent at the waist, its knees bending the wrong way, and its arms dragging unnaturally low, its head twisted completely around, staring at them as it moved in slow, jittering steps. Then it spoke. It didn't scream or growl, it just said, in a flat, emotionless voice, "You're not supposed to be here." Then it disappeared behind the trees without a sound. They packed up in minutes and left. One of them later found scratches on his tent, written in perfect block letters. "Don't bring fire to where we sleep." Story 18, The Singing That Comes from the Ground. In 1993, a team of spelunkers exploring a cave system in Montana broke through into a previously undocumented hollow beneath a remote stretch of forest. It was small, maybe 12 feet wide, and filled with tree roots punching through the rock ceiling. But what disturbed them wasn't the shape of the cave. It was the singing. Faint, low, and melodic, like a lullaby, coming from under the dirt. No instruments, no footsteps, Just a woman's voice, singing something in a language none of them could place. They assumed it was wind or an echo, until one of them whispered, "It's singing my name." The moment they tried to record it, the sound stopped. The cave walls seemed to tighten, and one member of the group later said she saw a hand pushing up from the soil, reaching toward her ankle before vanishing. They sealed the cave the next day. The lead explorer went missing 2 years later while hiking in that same forest. His body was never found, but his gear was recovered. His audio recorder still worked. On it, just one sound, a woman humming, very faintly, through the roots. Still reading? Good, because now it knows. The forest doesn't want to scare you. It wants to keep you. And the moment you stop looking over your shoulder, that's when it steps out from behind the tree. Would you like part 7 next? Or should we try a new nightmare, abandoned asylums, sunken towns, cursed mountains, or haunted highways?